Hey there, Cryptid family. If you enjoy the chills, don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you're new, and hit that notification bell if you're not afraid of the whispers. A special thanks to jhurl24 over on No Sleep for letting us use his story. You should check the description for the links to his work. I have spent the last decade of my life working in a tribal jail. When I first started, I was told 5 rules I had to follow to survive. These rules weren't for handling inmates or dealing with life as a CO. They were for how to survive the paranormal. I thought it was all bullshit and superstition. I could not have been more wrong. The first thing I noticed about this facility, it borders the start of a dense, ominous forest. When I arrived for my interview, I stepped out of my car and looked at the trees and hills behind the facility. It looked like they went on forever. The view was serene, and if I didn't know better, I would have thought the buildings in front of me hosted retreats and camps. The razor wire, however, quickly ruined the illusion. After my interview, it took about 3 weeks before I got the call offering me the job. I came in for my orientation on a Wednesday. It was all the normal onboarding stuff: HR forms, uniform and equipment issuance, facility tour, meeting my supervisor, and getting my training schedule. I got assigned to the graveyard shift, working Friday to Monday from 2100 to 0700. Not the ideal schedule, but I was the newbie, can't really complain. I was told by the jail administrator, the warden if you will, that I was to report for my first day that Friday. I walked into the briefing room at 20:30 on the dot and took my seat. "Hey, are you the new guy?" A deep, gravelly voice from in front of me said. "Yeah, that's me," I said. I looked up to see a man standing in front of me. He looked like he was in his mid-20s, about 6 feet even, and slim but well-built, wore a plain black hat, and had a nicely cropped beard. He looked at me with piercing green eyes, seemingly looking into my soul. "I'm Jay," I said. "I don't care," he said. "Once you're here for more than a month, then I'll care to learn your name." He then turned around and sat down in the chair in front of me. I looked around to see everyone else just talking and joking with each other like nothing had happened. "What the fuck was that about?" I whispered. "Don't mind Will, he's just tired of losing rookies." A soft voice to my left said. When I looked over, I saw a woman sitting next to me. "I'm Val. It's your first day, right?" she asked, extending her hand for a handshake. "Jay," I said. I shook her hand. If I had to guess, I'd say she was in her early 40s. Val was slender, had long brown hair styled into a tight bun. "Yeah, it's my first day. I had my orientation on Wednesday." "What did you do before this?" asked Val. "I worked security," I said. "Nice," said Val. "Have you worked graves before?" "Yeah, I actually was on graves before coming here, so hopefully the adjustment isn't too bad," I said. Val opened her mouth to reply, but cut herself off as we heard the door open and turned to see Corporal D walk in. Corporal D was an imposing figure to say the least. He was 6'5" and had to be at least 270 pounds. He wasn't pure muscle, but sure as hell wasn't fat. He had a look to him that gave the impression he was not someone to cross. "All right," he said, with a deep booming voice that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "Here's what we got going on today. To give some insight, this is how a standard briefing goes. It usually starts with a general rundown of what happened on the prior shift. After that, the supervisor will typically give out the post assignments. followed by any special tasks or assignments if there is any. Most of the time, that's the end of it. The supervisor will ask if there are any questions, very rarely is there, and then dismisses us to go to the floor and start shift. Sometimes, though, there is some housekeeping that needs to be addressed. This could be anything from addressing issues to brief training on a new policy or procedure. That's how that briefing went. Nothing exciting happened on swing shift, and no special assignments. There was, however, an issue to address. So to address the elephant in the room, we have a rookie, announced Corporal D. Officer J, stand up and introduce yourself. Yes, sir, I said. I then rose from my seat and noticed everyone staring at me. Not sure of what exactly I was supposed to say, I managed to choke out, "Hi, everyone." I then attempted to sit back down before Corporal D stopped me, saying, "Tell us a little about yourself. Have you worked in a jail before? Have you worked graves before? Do you believe in ghosts?" I could almost see a sly smile on Corporal D's face. I have not worked in a jail, let alone been in one before. I have spent the last year working graves doing security work. As for if I believe in ghosts, I laughed. No, I don't believe in ghosts or ghouls or things that go bump in the night. I'm not a kid. I smiled until I noticed everyone's faces go from smiling to serious. Corporal D looked at me and said, "Oh, you will." He then looked back down at his papers. "All right then, everyone has their assignments. Officer J and Officer Will stay behind. Everyone else get to work." Everyone but Will and I stood up and left the room, not before a couple mocking somebody's in trouble comments. Once everyone left, the room was silent. Will was the first to speak. What did I do this time? Corporal D narrowed his eyes at Will before cracking a smile. "You kept bitching that the last rookie wasn't being trained right." "Because they weren't. I spent half the time untraining the bullshit they learned working on day shift. That is why we lost him," Will said. Corporal D shot Will a look that reminded me of when your mom hears you swear. "Well, I talked to the brass and got them to try it your way this time." Will looked surprised. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Jay is fresh blood. He hasn't had any prior training. This is your opportunity to prove that your way of training works," Corporal D said. "However, if you fuck this up, we'll both be held responsible. Understood?" "Understood. Thank you for the opportunity, sir," Will said. "Jay, you will be attached to Will's hip. If he needs to shit, you help him wipe. Make sure you listen carefully to everything he teaches you. If you do that, then you'll turn out just fine," Corporal D said, before putting a 3-ring binder on the table in front of me. "This binder contains every policy, procedure, and schedule you need to know. Consider this an extra limb during your training. If you don't have it with you every day, then you aren't ready for work. Read every page carefully. Memorize it," he said. Corporal D then leaned in close. "I mean it, Jay. Read every fucking word." "Yes, sir," I said. "I promise I won't let you down. I'll read it on my weekends if I have to." "I hope not. I have you and Will working general population tonight. Get acquainted and don't be afraid to ask questions, even the stupid ones. I can guarantee you can't ask anything more stupid than a lot of the questions inmates ask," he said. After that, Will and I walked out of the room. "Is he always that serious?" I asked. "Who, Corporal D?" Will chuckled. "Nah, he just looks mean, but the guy's a teddy bear. It just takes a while for him to warm up to you." When we walked up to the entrance of H-Pod, I started to get nervous. "Damn, it's nice out here," I said in an attempt to clear my head. "Not even a breeze. Makes me wish I was at home to take it all in." Will looked at me and rolled his eyes. During my tour, I had only seen the unit for a brief moment, but now I'd be spending my first shift here. The door cycled, and we walked into the officer station. The inmates refer to H-Pod as the fishbowl because of the way the building is laid out. When you first walk in, there's the officer station, a desk with a bunch of drawers filled with miscellaneous papers and hygiene supplies, a computer and phone. To the right, 1 house, left, 2 house, and in front of the desk, 3 house. There are the 3 housing units, with windows spanning the walls so the officer can see into the units from the officer station. Each unit is identical, a bathroom with shower stalls and toilets next to 2 rows of bunk beds. And spanning the width of the unit is the day room, consisting of a few bolted-down tables and chairs. On one wall of each unit is a phone and a video visit station. Each unit can hold roughly 25 inmates. The entrance door then began to cycle. So, we gotta do a head count with the swing shift officer and get passed down, Will said as we walked through the door. Just as he said this, the radio chimed off. Attention in the facility. Formal head count is now in progress. Will and I proceeded into the officer station and placed our things on the desk. Holy shit, who the fuck let you in here? The shout came from the man sitting at the desk. Oh, sorry, I'm Schmidt. You must be Jay, right? Yeah, that's me, I said. Schmidt was an older heavyweight man with a mustache. He was well-kempt, but looked like he was a few years past retiring. Didn't know they made uniforms that big, Schmidt. Did the department have to special order it? Will said. Schmidt stood up and laughed. Fuck you, Will. Let's count so I can get the fuck out of here. Schmidt turned to me and asked, You do know how to count, right? Before I could answer, Will said, Of course he does. Will looked at me and said, Just take your boots off and use your fingers and toes if you get confused. The two laughed for a moment before we all walked to the first unit and counted. Once we finished counting the units, Schmidt sat back down at the computer. Will sat on the desk next to Schmidt, and I stood off to the side. Anything to pass down? Will asked. No, ain't shit happened out here today, although 2 House has been pretty needy, replied Schmidt. There might be a few guys needing phone pins, but other than that, everyone is pretty much squared away. Just glad it's Friday. Now I start the weekend. Any plans? Will asked. Aside from cleaning your mom's plumbing? No, joked Schmidt. Just plan on taking it easy and lounging around. I just saw her and she didn't mention having a plumbing, Will began to say before dropping his head laughing. Took you a minute there, didn't it? Laughed Schmidt. Rook, sometimes you have to give Will a minute to process things. He's special. His mom told me that. Schmidt laughed, slapping Will on the leg. I chuckled to myself. So how do you know when it's time to leave? I asked. Just as the words left my mouth, the radio keyed up. Attention in the facility. Formal head count is now clear. Almost immediately after the transmission, a different voice came over the radio. Swing shift, complete your pass down, clean up your area, finish any reports, and you are clear to go. I could feel Will and Schmidt looking at me. Never mind. Guess that answers my question, I said. Well, Will, looks like you finally found a trainee that's up to your speed, Schmidt said, laughing while patting Will on the shoulder. Jay, don't take it as if I'm picking on you. This is how we joke around here. It all comes from a good place. If anyone genuinely offends you, let them know, Schmidt said. And if anyone gives you shit, you let it fly right back at him. He grabbed his things and logged out of the computer. Stay safe tonight, guys. I'll see you later. Have a good weekend, you fat bastard, Will said. Later, I said. Schmidt then left. Well, it's just you and me, Rook, said Will. Grab your binder and find your login info for the computer. Let's make sure it works before Sergeant Wells leaves. I grabbed my binder and found my login info. Luckily, it worked. I then began to flip through the pages of the binder while the computer loaded up. Inside, I found the HR manual, facility policies and procedures, inmate handbook, and a weirdly discolored copied picture of uniform standards. I got to the back and found a single page titled 5 Rules Every Officer Must Follow to Survive Graveyard. It was photocopied and looked like the original was at least 15 to 20 years old. I took it out of the binder and held it up to Will. "Is this some kind of prank or something?" I asked, like some way of adding a little humor to the dry material. Will looked down and saw what I was holding. His face dropped. "Oh, make no mistake, that is no joke. I will take care of the first check while you get settled, but I recommend you read those rules first." He stood up and walked towards one house. While Will did the cell check, I read the rules. Rule 1. Don't whistle at night. Rule 2. Take a partner when doing a perimeter check when possible. If you must do it solo, just look at the fence and walk as quickly as possible. Do not talk to the woman in the tree line. Rule 3. If an inmate says they saw a shadow with nobody attached to it, acknowledge them, then move on like nothing was said. If you see a shadow with nobody attached to it, just turn and walk away. Rule 4. If you hear your name but nobody is around, act like someone was there and shrug it off like you just missed them walking away. If you hear someone talking to you after shrugging it off, do not follow the voice, especially if you are outside. Rule 5. If you see them and show fear, you're already a goner. Just go with them and don't try to bring anyone else with you. This has to be a fucking joke. There's no way it's not, I said. I set the paper down and leaned back in the chair. It's not a joke, and it is real, Will said as he walked by me. We'll talk more about it when I'm done with the check. Finish logging onto the computer. Will then opened the door of 2 house and walked inside. I finished setting up my profile and waited for Will. I looked over towards 1 house and looked into the window. I could see the light from the setting sun on the wall. Most of the inmates were already in bed. I heard the sound of someone tapping on the window behind me. "What's up?" I yelled before I turned around to see nobody there. I expected to see someone standing at the entrance door, waiting for it to cycle so they could come in. I expected something. I brushed it off as a mixture of the wind and my senses being heightened after reading the rules. After another couple minutes, Will returned having completed the check. "Hey, you got logged in." "Awesome. There's been too many times where rookies' login just didn't work. Usually it's from the sergeant fat-fingering the keys and adding an extra character. Just pull up the logs and find the tab titled Cell Check. From there, just type HPOD Cell Check Complete and hit Save," said Will. I did as he said, and we sat in silence for a moment. "So, are you going to explain how the rules aren't actually bullshit?" I asked. Will sighed and sat back on a chair he found in the storage closet. "Do you really not believe in the paranormal?" "No, I really don't. Every time I've heard anyone tell me a story of their experiences, it's always been explainable in one way or another," I said. "Have you ever experienced anything you couldn't readily explain?" Will asked. "Honestly, no, I haven't. I've never seen a shadow moving on its own, or heard a disembodied voice, or heard something only to see nothing there. It's not like I'm closed off to the idea of it. I just haven't experienced anything that has definitively proven it to me, and I'm not about to go searching for it either," I explained. Will eyed me curiously. I could tell he was trying to read me, and I don't blame him. I was doing the same to him when he talked. "So you didn't hear the woman tapping on the entrance door window?" Will asked. "You mean when the wind? It must have blown something at the door or something," I said. "You know damn well there's no wind," Will said. "Wasn't it you who pointed out how there wasn't even a breeze earlier?" "Yeah, I said that, but it's been a while since we were out there," I said. I then turned to face the door and looked at the treetops in the distance. After a minute of staring at the trees and not seeing them move even in the slightest, I turned back to Will. It could have been a random breeze that popped up and blew something. "Yeah, sure," Will said, a tinge of annoyance in his voice. He turned his chair to face me and leaned forward, looking me in the eyes. "Listen, I have been working here for about 3 years now. For the last year, I've been a trainer. In that time, I have had a hand in training about 10 rookies. Each one of them started on day shift and were sent to me after a month or two. You are the first I have gotten fresh. I will say this one time. If you listen to me and follow what I teach you to the letter, you will survive." I could see a mixture of passion and pleading desperation in Will's eyes when he said that to me. "How many of the rookies you've trained are still here?" I asked. Will sat back in his chair and sighed. After a moment of silence, Will said, "About 5. 5? I yelled. "How the fuck did half of the rookies you've trained quit?" "I never said they quit," Will said. "Then what happened to them?" I asked. Will looked at the computer before saying, "They didn't follow the rules." Will's voice was solemn, and I could tell he wasn't telling me everything. "Listen, you aren't ready for those stories. It's your first night. We'll get into that later. For now, focus on learning the job, and when you are ready, I'll tell you." "You can't just drop this on me and then tell me I'm not ready and move on," I said. "How am I supposed to not make the same mistakes as those 5 if I don't know what they did?" Will scowled at me. His tone changed from helpful to serious. "All you need to know right now is that they didn't follow the rules." Will stood up and looked down at me. "Drop it. I'm serious. Learn the rules and follow them," he barked before turning and walking into the bathroom. "Yes, sir," I said as he walked away. I was curious about what happened, but knew better than to press it on my first day. As I sat at the desk, I could hear the sounds of snoring and toilets flushing in the units. I opened the binder and put the sheet with the 5 rules back in its place. I skimmed through the employee manual when I heard the bathroom door open. "Hey, Rook, it's time for a check. Let's go," Will said. "Just like with head count, follow behind me." We then walked through the first unit. Once inside, I heard the door close behind me, and I quickly caught up with Will, who was a few feet in front. We walked down the aisles, and as we were going into the bathroom, I heard what sounded like the unit door cycling. I looked at Will, who shrugged and kept walking. When we went to exit the unit, the door was secured. We exited and finished the rest of the cell check. As the night went on, that's how it went. We'd do a cell check and sit back down and talk about the job. Will would explain how to do certain things, and what he has found works for him, and what he sees works for others. Sometime around 0500, Will sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "I think we've gone over enough work-related BS for the night. Why'd you take this job?" Will said. "Honestly," I said, "I needed the money." Will laughed. "At least you're honest. Most guys spout off some bullshit about helping the community or want to make a difference. Some of them really did mean it, but the majority of us just needed a job or needed to make more money." I was kind of taken aback. Here I thought I took this job for selfish reasons and assumed everyone here wanted to be a part of the change. It was a little bit of a confidence booster knowing this. I think Will could see this on my face. In the end, it doesn't matter what brought you here. At the end of the day, you showed up. In my book, there's no selfish or noble reason to work in this field. There's showing up and doing the job, and there's showing up and then bailing. That definitely helps my psyche a little, not gonna lie, I said. When I started working security, everyone had the same precedent for taking the job. The money wasn't good by any stretch of the imagination, but it was there. Will chuckled. Yeah, that sounds about right. Security is shit work, and even shittier pay. He looked back up towards the ceiling and asked, "So what did your friends and family say about it?" I sighed and looked down at the desk. Well, my friends said I was crazy. My mother-in-law, however, said that I would make a terrible officer. "And your wife?" he asked. "She didn't say much, but I could tell she's worried," I said. "She'll be fine." "Fuck your mother-in-law for saying that, though," Will said. We both laughed before doing another check. When we got back to the desk, I asked Will, "So, what about you?" "Well, I took the job because I needed one," he said. "Why'd you stay?" I asked. "I stay because I fell in love with it. I love the people I've worked with. The pay ain't bad either," Will said, nudging me with his elbow. After about an hour, Will and I were sitting at the desk. While I was reading over the set of 5 rules, I heard a loud yell saying, "Help me," followed by incoherent screaming coming from outside. It sounded like a female voice. "What the fuck was that?" I said. "You heard that too?" Will asked. "Hang on." Will reached for the phone and called control. "Hey, are you guys having fun without us?" He paused for a second. "We just heard someone screaming, 'Help me,' from outside. I thought it was someone fucking around and finding out." "You sure you didn't hear it?" His face went pale. "Yes, I know the rules. Just let me know if anything comes of it." Will then turned towards me. "They don't know what the fuck that was." From right at the H-pod entrance door, we could hear tapping. J, 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 J. A female voice was chanting my name at the door. "Help me, Jay." I looked at Will, who was frozen, staring at the computer screen. "Remember the rules. Act like it's not happening and just stare straight ahead," Will said. "Fucking help me, Jay," the voice screamed. The door began to shake violently and the taps turned to booming thuds. "Jay, I know you can hear me. I can see you shaking." The thuds grew faster and began to take on this wet sound, almost like whatever was hitting the door was bleeding. "You fucking coward, Jay. They will eat your eyes and fuck the holes left behind. When he is done with you, you'll wish you went to hell." One more loud, shrill scream came from the door before it was silent again. What was that?" I said shakily. My whole body was trembling. "Please tell me this is some kind of sick hazing tradition," I begged. Will shushed me and whispered, "Shut the fuck up." After what felt like eternity, but was only about 5 minutes, Will looked at me. His eyes were misty, and it sounded like I could almost hear him sniffle. "Have you ever been here before?" he asked. "This is my first time here. I'm not even from this area," I said. "Can you please explain what the fuck that was about?" "That was something I have not experienced in a few months. I've experienced her several times over the years, and no matter how it goes, you never get used to it," Will said. "We've taken to calling her Banshee. Now, if that's what she is, I don't know, nor do I care to find out." "How did she know my name?" I asked. We both were looking dead ahead still. Nobody knows how any of them know anything about us, but they do, Will said. So what do we do from here? I asked. We sat in silence for a moment before Will shook his head and said, I'll report it to Corporal D and let you know what he says. Will stood up and looked at the time. Let's do a check real quick, and then I'll see if Corporal D will come out here for a minute. I stood up and panned my eyes from 3 house to the entrance and exit doors. That's when I saw it. Will, I said. What's up? He asked. Look, I said, pointing at the entrance door window. Well, that's new, Will said. We both stared at the door and saw written in blood on the window the words, Jay, help me. Let's do this check real quick, Will said. The quicker we finish it, the quicker I can talk to D. There were only a couple of inmates up when we did our check in one house. Hey, CO, can you tell that bitch outside to shut the fuck up? We trying to sleep in here and she woke a few of us up, one inmate said. Yeah, the guys inside are dealing with it. Sorry, man. Caught us off guard too, Will said. You guys hear anything before the screaming? An inmate that was laying on a bunk along the wall facing outside sat up and looked at us. Yeah, I heard scratching on the wall for about 20 minutes or so before the yelling happened, he said. Anything else? I asked. Actually, yeah, the first inmate said. It looked like someone was looking in the window before we heard the scratching sounds. Will pointed at the window on the wall. That window? He asked. Yeah, the inmate replied. That window is at least 9 feet off the ground, Will said. The room went silent. Nobody said anything else after that. Will and I continued our check. None of the other units reported hearing anything. We returned to the desk and Will called Corporal D. Hey, Corporal, can you come out here for a minute? Got something you need to see, Will said. Right as he hung up the phone, we both looked at the door again. Holy shit, I said. The writing was gone. We both approached the door and looked at the glass of the window. No sign of it being cleaned off, I pointed out. Yeah, no sign of rain either. What the fuck, man? Will said. I could tell he was frustrated. He quickly returned to the desk and called Corporal D again. Hey, instead of coming out here right away, I need you to review cameras, Will requested. Yeah, the entrance door between 0500 and 0520. Tell me if anyone approached it or cleaned the window. Hey, Will? I said. I gave the window a further inspection. What I initially saw gave me the chills. The same layer of dust was on the window, with no signs of anybody touching it at all, let alone signs of someone writing on it and then cleaning it off. What's up, Jay? Will said. I turned to look at Will. When I made eye contact with him, his eyes went wide. Doesn't look like... I froze when I saw his expression. What? Will didn't say a word but pointed back at the window. When I turned back around, I saw it. What? The actual fuck. There wasn't anyone on the other side of the door, but something was writing on the window. J was the first word finished. It took a minute, but we both watched as the words were written. J, will, die. When I looked closer, it was unmistakable. It was written in blood. Just then the phone rang. Will picked it up. H-Pod, Officer Will. I walked back to the desk, though I couldn't make out what the voice on the other end was saying. It sounded panicked. Will's face went pale. Understood. I'll let him know. He hung up the phone and looked back at the window. We haven't experienced this before. Unexplained knocks, shadows moving, disembodied voices. Sure. But this, Will paused. I haven't seen writing inside the fence before. What do you mean by inside the fence? I asked. Most of those rules are for when you are out on a perimeter check. I've seen my fair share of weird and unexplainable shit here, but nothing like this, Will said, not taking his eyes off of the window. He composed himself and looked back at me. So, a bit of bad news. I can promise you, nothing is worse than seeing your name written in blood 2 different times, I joked. Well, we are going to have to stay behind for a debrief with Corporal D, Will said. Just then, I saw a flash of light come from outside the door. Once my eyes readjusted, I could see Corporal D standing there with a camera. Holy shit, I've heard stories from back in the day when this would happen. But they always said the evidence disappeared before they could collect evidence, Corporal D said while he was walking through the door. He pulled out a collection kit and took a sample of the blood. Hopefully this comes back with something. Maybe then we can get some answers. What do you mean, answers? I asked. Need to know basis, Rook, Will said. And trust me when I say, you probably don't want to know. Corporal D laughed. Will's right, kid. If you need to know, you'll get an update. Corporal D walked up to the desk and saw I had the rules sitting on top of my binder. Oh, good. You're learning the rules? He looked at me with a grin. So you still not believe in ghosts? I can confidently say I'm not sure at all anymore, I said smugly. Listen here, smart ass, Corporal D said. Let's see if that opinion changes. He looked at Will now. I'm going to steal your rookie for a little bit. Will looked at Corporal D, then at me and said, Sounds like a plan, sir. I then followed Corporal D up to control. What's going on, sir? I asked. I grimaced as the words left my mouth, realizing I should just keep my mouth shut. You'll see, he replied. When we got to control, I could see the camera viewing H-Pod was up on one of the screens, and it was paused at 4:55. Have a seat, Corporal D commanded. I sat down and watched the screen as Corporal D hit play. I watched as Will and I could be seen at the desk, and all the inmates in the units were sleeping save for 1 or 2. After a minute of nothing, I saw it. There was a dark, shadow-like mist that formed just outside the wall to one house. It morphed into a humanoid form and appeared to climb the wall before seemingly peering into the window of one house. It then disappeared before reappearing outside the entrance door. What the fuck? I said. Just then I could hear the screaming and yelling. The shadow appeared to slightly lose shape with each scream. The camera switched to the interior view. I could hear the tapping on the glass. It switched back to the view with the shadow. Then it happened. The door bowed with each bang. I watched as red blotches appeared on the glass of the window. Then, silence. I looked closely in disbelief. No fucking way. The shadow reached an arm up to the window and began to write. But from the camera, it was different. I could have sworn it wrote, "Jay, help me." But when I looked at the footage, it had changed. It said, "You could have stopped this, Will." The shadow disappeared right after the writing stopped. That's weird, I said, confused. What do you mean? Corporal D asked. When we first saw it, the writing said, "Jay, help me." Not that, I said. Corporal D looked shocked. He quickly picked up the phone and called Will. Hey, Will, what did the writing on the window say the first time? Not the one I got a picture of. Corporal D looked back at me. I was still watching the footage. Will and I got up and did our check, and the writing just vanished. I looked back to the camera that viewed the desk. It was then that Corporal D's words rang in my head. Oh, good. You're learning the rules. I remember putting that paper back into the binder. Actually, I know that I did. I watched as the shadow appeared at the desk. Corporal? He snapped his attention to me. You may want to see this. He hung up the phone, and we both watched as the shadow opened my binder and took out the paper with the rules on it and placed it on the desk. "Wow," Corporal D said. We continued to watch as the shadow disappeared again. Corporal D switched the camera back to the view of the door. The shadow didn't reappear this time, but the words, "J. will die," spelled themselves out on the window. "And now we are all caught up," he said. "What did Will say was written the first time?" I asked. "Same shit you said," he replied. "So let me ask you again." I cut him off. "Yeah, I'd say it's safe to say I believe now." Corporal D laughed and patted me on the shoulder. "Didn't think something would happen this soon. Sorry you had to go through this on your first night," he said. "Just get back to your post and tell Will there's no need for a debrief after shift." "Thank you, sir. I will deliver the message," I said, standing up. As I walked out of the room, Corporal D told me, "Oh, and Jay, don't quit on us now." "Sir," I said with a smile, "I quite literally can't afford to, so I guess I better get used to this kind of shit." When I got back to H-Pod, Will was sitting at the desk. "How'd it go?" he asked. "You definitely need to see that footage," I said. "Oh, I plan on it." Will laughed. "Hey, when the daywalkers get here, we'll leave this out of our pass down. They don't understand, and I don't feel like explaining my sanity." I just nodded my head in agreement. The sun began to rise, and the day shift officer arrived, and we did head count. Once we finished telling him how nothing happened, we left. As we walked out of the facility, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being followed. When I got into my car and looked out the windshield, I thought I saw a woman standing in the tree line, staring right at me. Remembering Rule 2, I turned my car on and drove home.